Anna had never imagined that marriage would feel this lonely. When she first met David, he had been warm, charming, and endlessly appreciative of her kindness. He was the kind of man who held doors open, who sent good morning texts, who listened when she spoke. They had met at a friend's dinner party where he had been quick to notice her struggling to carry a tray of drinks. He had taken it from her hands with a smile and said, "Let me help with that." That moment had stayed with her. It was a small act, but it made her believe that David was the kind of man who valued a partner, not just a wife. Someone who saw the effort others put in and respected it. But looking back now, she wondered if she had misread the entire situation. Because these days, David barely noticed her at all. Their marriage had started strong. She moved into his home, a spacious, well-furnished house in a quiet suburb 6 months after their wedding. The house was beautiful, but it had never truly felt like hers. She had tried to add her touches here and there, a few framed photographs, fresh flowers in the kitchen, soft blankets draped over the couches. But nothing changed the fact that this was David's house, where David and his son Josh had lived for years before she arrived. Josh was 14, old enough to understand what was happening when his father remarried, but still young enough to resent it, and resent it he did. At first, Anna had assumed it was normal. She had read articles about blending families and how hard it could be for children to accept a step-parent, so she was patient. She never forced affection, never demanded respect. She simply tried to be kind. She helped with his laundry, made his favorite meals, even tried to take an interest in his hobbies, though Josh was an expert at shutting her down. Conversations were one-sided. "How was school?" she'd ask at dinner. "Fine," he'd mutter, barely looking up from his plate. "Anything interesting happened today?" "No." She'd glance at David for help, hoping he'd encourage his son to be more polite, but he never did. Instead, he'd sigh and say, "Teenagers. You know how they are." And maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't personal, but it was hard not to take it that way when, no matter what she did, Josh treated her like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. Still, she kept trying. She woke up early every morning to make breakfast, even though neither of them ever thanked her. She cleaned up the house, did the grocery shopping, and made sure everything ran smoothly so David wouldn't have to worry after his long work days. She never complained, never asked for more than a simple acknowledgement. But even that was apparently too much to expect. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Anna had spent the afternoon deep cleaning the house. It wasn't that she particularly enjoyed cleaning, she didn't, but if she didn't do it, no one else would. She had scrubbed the bathrooms, vacuumed every room, and even tackled the mess in the garage that David kept saying he'd deal with eventually. By the time she finished, she was exhausted, her back aching from hours of bending and scrubbing. Still, she didn't stop. She moved straight to the kitchen, starting on dinner. She knew Josh liked homemade burgers, so she seasoned the meat just the way she had learned he preferred, toasted the buns, and even cut up fresh vegetables for toppings. By the time they walked in, the house smelled incredible. Anna wiped her hands on a dish towel, smiling as she greeted them. "Dinner's ready," she said, expecting at least a small nod of appreciation. Instead, Josh barely glanced at her as he dropped his backpack onto the floor. "Ugh, I hate when it smells like grease in here," he muttered before walking past her. Anna froze. The words weren't shouted or said with outright hostility, but the casual disregard in his voice was like a slap to the face. David, who had been standing right next to him, simply chuckled. "He's just being dramatic," he said, patting her shoulder before heading to the living room. No defense, no "hey, don't talk to her like that," just a chuckle as if she were overreacting. She swallowed down the lump in her throat and forced herself to shake it off. Maybe Josh was just in a bad mood. Maybe David was tired from work. She told herself it wasn't worth getting upset over, but the worst was yet to come. As they ate, Anna tried again to make conversation. "So, Josh, did you decide on a topic for your history project?" He barely looked up. "Yeah." She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. David, oblivious, was scrolling through his phone between bites. Anna cleared her throat. "What did you pick?" Josh sighed like she was the most annoying person in the world. "World War II, that's a good choice. Are you focusing on a specific part?" Josh rolled his eyes and took another bite of his burger. Why do you care? Anna blinked. I was just asking. Yeah, well, you don't have to. It's not like you're my mom or anything. Silence. David finally looked up, frowning slightly. Josh. But Josh wasn't finished. He scoffed, shaking his head. Seriously, why do you act like you're part of this family? You're just here to clean and cook. You're basically the maid. The words cut deeper than she expected. The worst part wasn't even Josh saying it. It was the way David didn't immediately correct him. Anna turned to her husband, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend her. To tell his son that she was his wife, not his maid, that she was here because she loved them, not because she owed them service. David sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Josh, don't be rude. That was it. Not apologize. Not, that was unacceptable. Just a tired sigh, as if Josh had merely forgotten to say, please. Anna put down her fork, her appetite gone. She had spent all day making sure this house was spotless, cooking a meal they enjoyed, trying to connect with a boy who refused to let her in, and this was the thanks she got? A casual insult and a husband who couldn't even be bothered to stand up for her? She stood up. I lost my appetite, she said quietly, and walked out of the room. Neither of them followed. That night, lying in bed next to David, who had already fallen asleep as if nothing had happened, Anna stared at the ceiling and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't how a marriage was supposed to feel. She wasn't a maid, and she wasn't going to be treated like one. What she didn't know yet was that the next morning, she would make a decision that would change everything. Anna woke up to the sound of David's alarm buzzing at 6:30 a.m. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, waiting to see if he would turn it off. He didn't. He never did. With a sigh, she reached over and silenced it for him, just as she had done every morning since they got married. David rolled over, mumbling something incoherent before falling back asleep. Anna lay there for a moment, thinking about the night before. You're basically the maid. Josh's words still echoed in her mind. But it wasn't just what he had said, it was the way David had barely reacted. A quiet scolding, a sigh, and then nothing. No conversation afterward, no apology, no acknowledgement of how deeply it had hurt her. Anna turned her head to look at her husband. His face was relaxed in sleep, his breathing deep and even. He looked peaceful, like a man who had no idea that his wife was lying next to him, feeling invisible. Slowly, she pushed back the covers and got out of bed. She padded down the hallway to the kitchen, where she automatically reached for the coffee maker. Muscle memory, a routine she had never questioned. She brewed the coffee, poured David's into his favorite mug, and set it on the counter. Then she opened the fridge and started pulling out ingredients for breakfast. Halfway through cracking an egg, she stopped. Why was she doing this? She stood there, staring at the yolk in the bowl, her hands trembling slightly. Did either of them care that she did this every morning? Did David ever wake up and think, wow, I'm lucky to have her? Did Josh even realize how much effort she put into making their lives easier? Or was she just expected to do it? The thought made her stomach turn. Instead of finishing breakfast, she put the eggs back in the fridge, left David's coffee on the counter, and walked away. She sat at the kitchen table, wrapping her hands around her own mug, staring out the window as the sun slowly rose. A realization crept in, slow and unsettling. They don't appreciate me because I've never given them a reason to. She had made everything too easy for them. When Josh left his dirty dishes in the sink, she washed them. When David forgot to pick up groceries, she went without complaint. When the house was a mess, she cleaned it before anyone even noticed. They never had to deal with the discomfort of their own neglect because she was always there to pick up the slack. She thought about that for a long time. By the time David finally shuffled into the kitchen, hair tousled, still half asleep, she had made a decision. Morning, he mumbled, reaching for his coffee. He took a sip, then frowned slightly. Did you forget the sugar? Anna blinked. That was the first thing he said to her? Not, good morning, not, how did you sleep, not even a simple, thanks for making this. Just a complaint. She stood up. There's sugar in the cupboard, she said, and walked out of the kitchen before he could respond. It wasn't much, but it was the first time she had let him take care of something himself. and it wouldn't be the last. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Anna did nothing. It was strange at first. She had spent so long moving, cleaning, organizing, making sure everything ran smoothly that sitting still felt unnatural, but she forced herself to do it. She didn't make the beds, she didn't wash the dishes from last night, she didn't pick up Josh's dirty socks from the living room floor. Instead, she sat on the couch with a book. At first, she kept glancing up, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for David to say something about the mess, waiting for Josh to realize there was no clean laundry. But hours passed, and no one said a word. David was at work, of course. He wouldn't notice anything until he got home. But Josh? Josh came home from school, dropped his backpack in the middle of the hallway, kicked off his shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. Anna heard the fridge open, then close. Then, ugh, where's dinner? She smiled to herself. He waited a few minutes, probably expecting her to appear, but she didn't. Eventually, he sighed loudly and grabbed a bag of chips. Later that evening, when David got home, Anna was still on the couch, scrolling through her phone. David walked in, loosening his tie. "Hey, babe, what's for dinner?" It was automatic, thoughtless, as if she were a personal chef instead of his wife. She looked up at him. "I don't know," she said casually. "I figured you two could handle it tonight." David blinked. "What? I didn't cook today." For the first time in a long time, there was silence. David glanced toward the kitchen like he expected to see food magically waiting for him. When he realized there wasn't, he sighed and rubbed his face. "Okay, I guess. We'll order something." "Sounds good," she said, returning to her phone. She could feel his confusion from across the room. Josh came downstairs, tossing his phone onto the couch. "Dad, can we get pizza?" David sighed. "Sure, whatever." Anna watched as they ordered dinner, still looking slightly bewildered by the change. But they didn't ask why. They didn't say, "Hey, is everything okay?" They didn't wonder if something was wrong. Because they hadn't noticed that she was unhappy. That realization hurt more than she expected. Over the next few days, Anna did less and less. She still went to work, of course. She still took care of herself. But she stopped cleaning up after them. She didn't remind David about his appointments. She didn't fold Josh's clothes. At first, they didn't notice. But soon, the house started to show the difference. Dishes piled up in the sink, the laundry basket overflowed, the garbage went unemptied. One evening, David walked into the bathroom and groaned. "Why is there no clean towels?" Anna didn't look up from her book. "Probably because no one washed them." David frowned. "I thought you—" He stopped himself. Anna raised an eyebrow. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, I'll do it tomorrow." Tomorrow came and went. The towels stayed unwashed. Josh, meanwhile, started complaining more. "Why is my favorite hoodie still dirty? We're out of snacks. This place is gross." Anna just shrugged. One night, David sat down beside her on the couch. "Anna," he said carefully, "is something going on?" She turned to face him. "What do you mean? You've been different lately." She tilted her head. "How so? You're not—" He gestured vaguely. "I don't know. The house is a mess. You're not cooking. It just feels like you're not really trying." Anna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David," she said, "for the past 2 years I've been trying, and you didn't even notice." David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, she saw understanding flicker in his expression. But understanding wasn't enough. Something had to change, and Anna knew exactly what she needed to do next. Anna woke up earlier than usual, but this time not to make breakfast or pick up after anyone. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. She had made a decision, a real decision, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't second-guessing herself. The house was silent. David was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and steady. She turned her head to look at him, wondering if he had even noticed how distant she had been lately. Probably not. Carefully, she slid out of bed and padded into the bathroom. She turned on the shower, letting the hot water run as she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked tired. Not in the way that came from lack of sleep, but the exhaustion that built up over years of feeling unseen, unappreciated. Today, that would change. By the time she was dressed and ready, the sun was just beginning to rise. She moved quietly through the house, packing a small suitcase with the essentials, clothes, toiletries, important documents. She didn't need much. She wasn't planning on leaving forever, just long enough to make a point. As she zipped up the suitcase, she glanced around the bedroom. The bed was unmade. A pair of David's socks lay discarded on the floor. Normally, she would pick them up without thinking. She left them where they were. Downstairs, she poured herself a cup of coffee, but for the first time in years, she didn't make one for David. She didn't start breakfast. She didn't pack Josh's lunch. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, savoring the silence. And then she wrote the note. It wasn't dramatic. No long explanations, no emotional outbursts. Just a simple, direct message. Since I was just the maid, I'm off duty. Good luck. She placed it on the counter where David would see it. Then, with one last glance around the house she had spent so much time maintaining for people who never appreciated it, she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. Anna checked into a small hotel not far from home. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and, most importantly, hers. No one was asking her for anything. No one was expecting her to take care of them. For the first time in years, she was completely alone. And she loved it. She ordered room service just because she could. She took a long, uninterrupted bath. She watched a movie without anyone asking where their socks were or what was for dinner. It was heaven. But she wasn't naive. She knew David would call eventually. She didn't have to wait long. By noon, her phone buzzed. She let it ring. A minute later, it buzzed again. He didn't fold Josh's clothes. At first, they didn't notice. But soon, the house started to show the difference. Dishes piled up in the sink. The laundry basket overflowed. The garbage went unemptied. One evening, David walked into the bathroom and groaned. Why is there no clean towels? Anna didn't look up from her book. Probably because no one washed them? David frowned. I thought you... He stopped himself. Anna raised an eyebrow. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine, I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went. The towels stayed unwashed. Josh, meanwhile, started complaining more. Why is my favorite hoodie still dirty? We're out of snacks. This place is gross. Anna just shrugged. One night, David sat down beside her on the couch. Anna, he said carefully, is something going on? She turned to face him. What do you mean? You've been different lately. She tilted her head. How so? You're not... He gestured vaguely. I don't know. The house is a mess. You're not cooking. It just feels like you're not really trying. Trying. Anna laughed, but there was no humor in it. David, she said, for the past 2 years I've been trying, and you didn't even notice. David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, she saw understanding flicker in his expression. But understanding wasn't enough. Something had to change, and Anna knew exactly what she needed to do next. Anna woke up earlier than usual, but this time, not to make breakfast or pick up after anyone. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. She had made a decision, a real decision. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't second-guessing herself. The house was silent. David was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and steady. She turned her head to look at him, wondering if he had even noticed how distant she had been lately. Probably not. Carefully, she slid out of bed and padded into the bathroom. She turned on the shower, letting the hot water run as she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked tired, not in the way that came from lack of sleep, but the exhaustion that built up over years of feeling unseen, unappreciated. Today, that would change. By the time she was dressed and ready, the sun was just beginning to rise. She moved quietly through the house, packing a small suitcase with the essentials: clothes, toiletries, important documents. She didn't need much. She wasn't planning on leaving forever, just long enough to make a point. As she zipped up the suitcase, she glanced around the bedroom. The bed was unmade. A pair of David's socks lay discarded on the floor. Normally, she would pick them up without thinking. She left them where they were. Downstairs, she poured herself a cup of coffee, but for the first time in years, she didn't make one for David. She didn't start breakfast. She didn't pack Josh's lunch. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, savoring the silence. And then she wrote the note. It wasn't dramatic, no long explanations, no emotional outbursts, just a simple, direct message. Since I was just the maid, I'm off duty. Good luck. She placed it on the counter where David would see it. Then, with one last glance around the house she had spent so much time maintaining for people who never appreciated it, she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. Anna checked into a small hotel not far from home. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and, most importantly, hers. No one was asking her for anything. No one was expecting her to take care of them. For the first time in years, she was completely alone. And she loved it. She ordered room service just because she could. She took a long, uninterrupted bath. She watched a movie without anyone asking where their socks were or what was for dinner. It was heaven. But she wasn't naive. She knew David would call eventually. She didn't have to wait long. By noon, her phone buzzed. She let it ring. A minute later, it buzzed again. Then a text. "Where are you?" Anna took a sip of her coffee and ignored it. Another text followed. "What is this note? What's going on?" She let him stew. For 2 days, she didn't respond. Meanwhile, at home, chaos was unfolding. The first thing David noticed was the mess. At first, it was little things. He went downstairs that first morning expecting coffee, only to find an empty pot. He frowned, looking around, confused. The counter was bare. No breakfast. No packed lunch for Josh. He sighed and made his own coffee, grumbling under his breath. He was already running late. He didn't have time for this. Then he saw the note. The short, clipped words made his stomach twist. "Since I was just the maid, I'm off duty. Good luck." David reread it 3 times. Anna was gone. And she wasn't just out running errands. For the first time, real unease crept in. He called her, no answer. He texted, nothing. He told himself not to overreact. She'd be back. Maybe this was some kind of test. But by that evening, when he came home to a messy house, an annoyed teenage son, and no dinner on the table, reality started sinking in. Josh was already irritated. "Where's Anna?" he demanded, as soon as David walked in. David dropped his briefcase by the door. She left." Josh frowned. "Left where?" "I don't know." Josh scoffed. "Well, when is she coming back?" David didn't answer. For the first time, he realized he had no idea. And for the first time, he realized how much he had taken her for granted. The house deteriorated quickly. Josh, despite all his complaints about Anna, had grown used to clean clothes magically appearing in his drawers, fresh food in the fridge, and dishes that never stayed dirty for long. Without her, the reality of their situation hit fast. By the second day, there were no clean dishes. Josh had gone to grab a plate for a snack, only to find the sink full. "Why is everything dirty?" he groaned. David, exhausted from work, barely looked up. "Then wash something." Josh made a face. "That's not my job." David shot him a sharp look. "Well, it's not mine either." Josh folded his arms. "It was Anna's." The words hung heavy in the air. David swallowed hard. "She's not here." Josh sighed dramatically. "So, what are we supposed to do?" David ran a hand through his hair. "Figure it out." But neither of them really knew how. The laundry piled up, the fridge emptied, the floors grew dusty. Anna had always handled everything so seamlessly that neither of them had truly noticed all she did. Until now. On the 3rd day, David tried calling again. This time, Anna picked up. "Anna," he said, relieved. "Where are you?" "Somewhere clean," she said. He exhaled. "Okay, I get it. You're upset, but you made your point. Come home." She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, David, you really don't get it, do you?" His stomach twisted. What do you mean? I didn't do this to prove a point, she said. I did it because I'm done being treated like I don't matter. David was silent. Anna continued, her voice calm but firm. Do you even realize how little you and Josh appreciate me? How much I've given to this house, to this family, only to be treated like I'm nothing more than a maid? David opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. You didn't defend me when your son disrespected me. You don't notice the things I do until they're not done. And now that you have to take care of yourselves, you suddenly care? That's not fair. Fair? Anna scoffed. Do you know what's not fair? Giving everything to a family that doesn't see you. Silence. David exhaled. What do you want me to say, Anna? I get it. I messed up. But you can't just leave. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I can. And I did. And then she hung up. David stared at his phone, his heart pounding. For the first time, he was afraid she might not come back. And the worst part, he couldn't blame her. Anna sat in the quiet hotel room, staring out the window at the city below. It had been nearly a week since she left, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. No responsibilities pressing down on her. No one asking where their socks were. No last-minute dinner plans dumped on her without warning. She had spent the past few days doing things for herself, reading, taking long walks, sleeping in without guilt. It felt foreign, indulgent even. But as each day passed, she realized something that should have been obvious all along. She had been drowning in that house. And David and Josh had been the ones pushing her under. Her phone buzzed. She already knew who it was. David. She let it ring, waiting for the inevitable voicemail. When it came, she played it on speaker, sipping her coffee as his tired voice filled the room. Anna, please, just call me back. A sigh. I know you're angry. I know I messed up. But this isn't how we fix things. Another pause. Josh is struggling without you. He won't admit it, but he is. And I don't know what to do. Just come home and we'll talk. Please. The message ended. Anna exhaled slowly. She wasn't heartless. She wasn't enjoying their suffering. But she needed them to sit in it for a while, to understand what life was like without her. Because if she went back too soon, nothing would change. She had given David everything, her time, her effort, her love, and he had taken it all for granted. Josh, though still a kid, had followed his father's lead, treating her like a background character in his life instead of a person with her own needs. Would they change if she returned? Or would they breathe a sigh of relief, go back to their habits, and let her slip back into the role of their unpaid housekeeper? She wouldn't risk it. She needed more than an apology. She needed proof. So she stayed. Back at the house, things continued to spiral. David had managed to keep things somewhat together at first, ordering takeout, doing the bare minimum to keep the house from looking like a disaster zone. But as the days stretched on, reality set in. He hadn't done a real grocery run in years. He didn't know which detergent Anna used or how often the sheets needed changing. Laundry sat in piles, dishes overflowed in the sink, and the floors, once spotless, were covered in dust and crumbs. Josh, used to everything being handled for him, grew frustrated fast. "Where's my hoodie?" he snapped one evening. "It's been in the laundry basket for a week." David, exhausted from work and the mess of a house he now had to manage, sighed. "Then wash it." Josh scoffed. "I don't know how." David pinched the bridge of his nose. "Figure it out." Josh muttered something under his breath and stormed upstairs. An hour later, there was a loud bang, followed by a string of curses. David found Josh in the laundry room, standing in front of an overflowing washing machine, suds foaming onto the floor. "What the hell did you do?" David demanded. "I just put soap in. It's what Mom does." David ran a hand through his hair, realizing with a sinking feeling that he had no idea how Anna did it, how she made their lives run so smoothly without complaint. For the first time, he saw just how much she had been doing, and how little they had ever acknowledged it. By the end of the week, David was at his breaking point. He left work early and drove to the hotel. He didn't even know which room was hers, but after some convincing at the front desk, they let him call up. Anna picked up on the first ring. "David!" "Anna, I'm here," he said, his voice tight. In the lobby. Silence, then a sigh. I'll be down in a minute. When she appeared, he barely recognized her. She looked rested, happier, stronger. He hated how obvious it was that she had been better off without them. She sat across from him in the small hotel lounge, watching him carefully. So? David swallowed hard. I messed up. She said nothing, just waited. I didn't see it before, he admitted. How much you did for us. How much I took you for granted. He exhaled. But I see it now, and I'm sorry, Anna. I really am. She studied him, her expression unreadable. Do you? She asked quietly. Do you really see it? David nodded. The house is a mess. Josh is a mess. I'm a mess. We can't do this without you. Anna's jaw tightened. That's the problem, David. You shouldn't need me to function. I'm your wife, not your maid. And Josh? She exhaled. You let him disrespect me. You let him see me as nothing more than the woman who cleans up after him. That's on you. David's stomach twisted. I know, he admitted. And I'm going to fix it. I swear to you, Anna. Things are going to change. Anna looked away for a moment as if weighing his words. Then, softly, why now? David hesitated. Because I don't want to lose you. Anna searched his face, trying to decide if she believed him. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But she needed more than words. Okay, she said finally. Then prove it. David frowned. How? She met his gaze. Go home, clean your house, teach your son how to do his own laundry, cook dinner, handle your own lives without me. And if, after a month, you still want me to come back, we will talk. David stared at her. A month? He wanted to argue, to say it was too long, but the look in her eyes told him there was no room for negotiation. This was the test, and if he failed, he'd lose her for good. He swallowed hard. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Anna nodded, standing. Good, she said simply. Then she turned and walked away, leaving David sitting there, terrified he'd already lost the best thing that had ever happened to him. The next month was the hardest of David's life, but he did it. He deep-cleaned the house, he learned how to properly do laundry, he cooked, not well, but enough to keep them from living on takeout. And Josh? Josh struggled at first. He was used to treating Anna like a servant, but without her, he had no choice but to step up. The first time he did his own laundry correctly, David saw something shift in him, a realization that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about how little effort it took to keep a home running. By the end of the month, the house was different. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. And for the first time, David and Josh both truly appreciated everything Anna had done. So when Anna finally agreed to meet them for dinner, they weren't just ready to apologize. They were ready to be better. David looked at her across the table, his voice steady. We've changed, Anna. But no matter what you decide, I just need you to know. We see you now. Anna studied him, then Josh. And slowly, she smiled. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for them after all.